In 1977, with editing by Christopher Tolkien and Guy Gavriel Kay, The Silmarillion was posthumously published 4 years after author J.R.R. Tolkien's death. It was a collection of stories from the late J.R.R. Tolkien's Legendarium, meant to build and set up the world of Tolkien's fantasy epic, The Lord of the Rings. In fact, The Lord of the Rings was meant to be the endpoint of The Silmarillion, but Lord of the Rings was initially published alone for publisher reasons. We'll get to that later. And when I say The Silmarillion is a collection, I mean it. It's a series of texts written throughout Tolkien's life, and he always had the lore of the Silmarillion in mind when writing The Lord of the Rings, and parts of it were even written before it. To quote J.R.R. himself in a letter written to Milton Waldman in 1951, included in the preface to the second edition of the Silmarillion, "A passion of mine ab initio was for myth, not allegory, and for fairy story, and above all for heroic legend on the brink of fairy tale and history, of which there is far too little in the world, accessible to me, for my appetite. I was an undergraduate before thought and experience revealed to me that these were not divergent interests, opposite poles of science and romance, but integrally related." He went on, "Do not laugh, but once upon a time, my crest has long since fallen, I had a mind to make a body of more or less connected legend, ranging from the large and cosmogonic to the level of romantic fairy story. The larger founded on the lesser in contact with the earth, the lesser drawing splendor from the vast backcloths, which I could dedicate simply to England, to my country." What Tolkien had aimed to do with his Legendarium was novel at the time. This isn't to say that grand sweeping mythologies weren't a thing, but it was rare at the time for a fantasy author to conjure something of this scope, especially out of a sense of love for the craft, and for English history and mythmaking. At the time of the Silmarillion's publication, reception was mixed, with critics bemoaning its complexity and hugeness. To quote Robert M. Adams' review for the New York Review at the time, "Despite the cuts that have evidently been made in the original materials, the selection and arrangement that have been imposed on them remains an empty and pompous bore. There are epic elements in it, but they have been smothered by an overgrowth of genealogy." Hey, as someone who's neck deep in Elden Ring, I get it. But since then, that complexity and hugeness has become a hallmark of the Silmarillion, and many today praise it as being a difficult but important component of Tolkien's canon. And today, in this entertainment landscape, what Tolkien attempted with the Legendarium reads as incredibly influential. Even though the Silmarillion is considered the dark sheep of Tolkien's Legendarium, with its sales being eclipsed 100-fold by its sisters The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, it's difficult to imagine what many pop culture franchises today would look like if Tolkien hadn't helped pave the way for massive mythological tapestries of histories and side stories. Again, this isn't to say that massive mythological tapestries hadn't existed before Tolkien, of course. Tolkien himself had directly referenced Greek, Celtic, Romance, Germanic, Scandinavian, and Finnish mythology in that letter to Milton Waldman I quoted earlier. But Tolkien's mythmaking has been hugely influential to a number of popular works over the decades, some of which have become hugely influential in their own right. So, on that note, let's talk about Star Wars. And let's put a pin on the Silmarillion. We'll come back to it later. Also, spoilers for The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett up to this point, I guess. Boba Fett is an intergalactic bounty hunter first introduced in the Star Wars Holiday Special. That's right, we're beginning this not at The Empire Strikes Back, or Attack of the Clones, or on that brief streak of Clone Wars where he works alongside Asajj Ventress. We're starting at the very beginning of our cultural understanding of Boba Fett. The Star Wars Holiday Special is wonderful. I mean, it's awful, of course it is. It's earned that reputation, but I love it. It's such a bewildering, unabashed disaster.
Oh, yes. I can feel my creation. I'm getting your message. Are you getting mine?
Boba Fett made his first appearance in the holiday special in The Story of the Faithful Wookiee, an animated short that I can only describe as Zelda CDI core.
He's on a collision course. Princess, we're in mortal danger from our own forces.
Lamp oil, rope, bombs? You want it? It's yours, my friend.
The Star Wars Holiday Special is a baffling fever dream, and The Story of the Faithful Wookiee is no exception. Boba Fett is introduced as this trickster who lures Luke and Han into a trap and almost succeeds in his plan before being foiled by Chewbacca because and I quote,
He just didn't smell right.
But let's step away from the holiday special. I wanted to start with it to demonstrate something that I think Star Wars has actually been doing really well lately, even over 40 years after Boba Fett first graced unfortunate television screens in 1978. And that is that Star Wars has always been, and thankfully still is, very silly. Yes, I'm going to be ripping hard into the Book of Boba Fett later, but I don't want to make this sound like a limp attempt at positivity for the sake of positivity. This is something that I think Lucasfilm under Disney deserves genuine commendation for. I think when it comes to the core Star Wars movies, there's so much that we take for granted as elements of Star Wars that we often forget that some of this stuff is just really, really silly. Like, Empire Strikes Back is lauded as the best in its franchise, a movie so full of dramatic character developments and shifts in the status quo, but I think the fanbase often loses sight of the fact that Luke travels to a swamp planet and discovers that the legendary Jedi Master he's looking for is a diminutive Muppet voiced by Fozzie Bear who steals his lunch and whacks a droid over and over again with a stick. It's silly. It's one of the best twists in the entire Star Wars canon, and while I think it's unfortunate that Star Wars fans tend to overlook that kind of silliness, I think that Lucasfilm under Disney has been very, very wise to recognize it and keep it as an important aspect of Star Wars. Like, people dunk on The Last Jedi all the time for subverting expectations, but I want you to look at Luke drinking that dinosaur's milk straight from the teat and tell me that it does not belong in Star Wars. To me, that is the soul of Star Wars. The Book of Boba Fett is, similarly, a very silly show. Boba recruits a 1950s biker gang dressed like bored 90s teenagers at Lollapalooza to fight a drug cartel alongside a baby wizard and a kaiju tamed by himself and Danny Trejo. I live for that kind of silliness. Boba Fett tries to look cool and calculated, and believe me, the marketing always plays into this, but in the movies themselves, he is a hilarious sore loser. And even in childhood, he was...
Get him, Dad! Get him! Fire!
That. In that regard, I can see the appeal of a show about Boba Fett. This was Boba Fett's chance to become more than a strongman for a sleazy mob boss, falling anticlimactically into a sandworm pit, to shed that reputation, to become a leader, a force for good in his community where there was no force for good before. And I do genuinely admire that the show aims to do this without discarding the silliness or camp surrounding him and the world he lives in. It really did aim for that. It sure did try. See, I think there's a fundamental problem with Boba Fett's arc in this show, and talking about it will require getting into the nitty-gritty of the show's plot, so bear with me, this is gonna take a while. Boba Fett spends much of the series in a back-to-tank, flashing back to his life leading up to the present moment, and it is clumsy storytelling to try and tell both past and present stories at once, but let's not dwell on that for now. To summarize, Boba Fett brute forces his way out of the Sarlacc pit and it screws up his armor, and eventually he gets captured by a band of Tuskens who eventually take him in. I love what the Tuskens have become in recent years. I think that fleshing out the Tuskens' culture and having them communicate with the outside world using their own sign language is an incredibly positive aspect of modern Star Wars. The Tuskens have an awkward history of being a dehumanized, sort of savage tribe that carried, unfortunate, if not intentional, aspects of racial Native American coding. Just one early example of racial coding in a franchise with a long history of it.
This is getting out of hand.
If Star Wars is to be considered a space western, which is even more popular a consideration than ever now that The Mandalorian is the biggest Star Wars-related thing on the planet, then it must grapple with the racial coding and colonialist themes that are and always have been endemic to the Western genre as a whole. It doesn't matter if you change out the real-life West for a fictional space West, you're still going to be dealing with themes of bringing law and order into a wild land, by which the Western genre subtextually usually means white law and order to a non-white wild land. Intentional or not, in the texts of the Star Wars films, the Tuskens are a savage race that brutalizes and causes trouble for the human, and usually white, protagonists. Or, if we want to give it a more charitable Thermian argument reading, that's the reputation they have in-universe. One of the bigger factors in Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader, after all, is the kidnapping and murder of his mother by a band of Tuskens.
They're like animals, and I slaughtered them like animals.
Hell, Luke and Obi-Wan see a burnt-down sandcrawler in the very first Star Wars movie, and Obi-Wan has to remind Luke that it wasn't Tuskens.
And these last points, too accurate for sand people. Only Imperial stormtroopers are so precise.
So, it was really refreshing when the first episode of The Mandalorian's second season rolled around and Mando communicated with the Tuskens in sign language. Holy shit, a Tusken language diegetically spoken in the show. That's a low bar to clear, to have a traditionally dehumanized race in your sci-fi universe have a language that can be translated and understood, but it's humanization. It does just that little bit to humanize what both characters within the show and audiences outside the show understand as a dehumanized race. That's progress. The Book of Boba Fett goes a step further by having Boba Fett be taken in by a band of Tuskens, and holy shit! Not only do they have a language diegetically spoken in the show, they have a culture. They have a hierarchy. They have their own systems of laws, their own weapons, their own combat styles, their own understanding of other cultures' technology. Like, that specter of racial coding and stereotyping is still there, but they're a people now. I get the sense that Star Wars writers have grown from seeing Tuskens as a space western bad guy to seeing them as a nuanced race with their own problems and outlook on life. They've elevated them to a more equal playing field to the human characters by showing their language and their culture. It's made the Star Wars universe bigger, even if it's still taking place on Tatooine. This is progress. And then they get murdered halfway through the series. So, I don't want to simplify this issue or make this about my own specific beef with this aspect of the show. I am white. I cannot speak for indigenous peoples about what fans should feel when the indigenous coded characters get killed off. When I first watched this show, the Tusken Massacre struck me as a poor writing decision, and a casting aside of what made the new portrayal of the Tuskens great in service of an angry human character's arc. But ultimately, I'm not the one to ask about this scene. Many indigenous fans brought up that casting Temuera Morrison, a Maori actor, as Boba Fett does a lot to deconstruct a lot of the white savior tropes that the Book of Boba Fett seems to fall back on. It's actually worth noting that Boba Fett stands with the Tuskens to help them instead of simply trying to fight on their behalf by himself to boost his own ego. To pull a quote from that article, Boba goes up to the village elder and says, "I will do something. I'm asking permission from you. If you give me a rifle, if you give me a gaffy stick, I'll do what I know how. I'll do what I can. If you let me, I would like your permission to do it." And if anything, the writing decision to kill the tribe off was more of a double-edged sword. To white fans, admittedly like myself, this reads as a lazy and regrettable fridging decision. However, some indigenous fans looked at this and saw an emotional reminder of real indigenous history. If anything, the general complaint wasn't the decision to kill the tribe off, it was the fact that the Tuskens' arc ended so abruptly, that Boba simply didn't have the screen time to sit in and really internalize that kind of intense grief. This is actually something that Temuera Morrison himself has commented on. I think it's important to recognize progress. Modern Star Wars portrayal of the Tuskens is leaps and bounds ahead of where it used to be, and that makes their massacre more innately heartbreaking. And people who have different histories when it comes to indigenous culture are going to read that differently from me, a white person yelling about Star Wars on the internet. To paraphrase Shiran J. Zhao's collection of Southeast Asian presentations on Raya and the Last Dragon, which you should totally watch, it's important to stop before you tweet or vlog and carefully think, am I being an ally, or am I shouting over the voices who actually have something meaningful to say? I'm gonna leave the discussion of the Tuskens at that and move on. Please keep it civil in the comments. So anyway, back to the nitty-gritty of the plot. At this point, the flashbacks have caught up with the present day, and Boba Fett has his conflict. Not only is the Pike Syndicate moving in on Mos Espa, forcing Boba Fett to defend his new turf, but his respite with the Tuskens has forced him to shed his cold bounty hunter exterior and learn the meaning of community and leadership. Boba Fett's ascending of Jabba's old throne is symbolic of his desire to cast away his bounty hunter past and become a leader. This is reinforced in a number of ways. He puts that Lollapalooza biker gang to work spying on the Pikes. He hires the Wookiee assassin who was originally hired to murder him. He convinces another stone-cold bounty hunter type to put the morally right thing over her own profits. Danny Trejo offers him a Rancor with whom he imprints on sight. Hell, even the weaselly comic relief mayor's secretary shows up to at least half-assedly try some diplomacy on Boba's behalf. Boba Fett even calls an old connection back into the fray. More on that later. And that connection calls another old connection who, posthumously, brings his entire town over to Mos Espa in order to help with the fight. So, final episode. The gang's mostly all here, and those that aren't here are gonna arrive later because dramatic tension. This is the big climax, the big payoff to Boba Fett using his new diplomatic skills to assemble an army and drive the Pikes out. And, you know, it's a cool episode. You get to see all the cool characters do all the cool things they're known for. The show even brings back an old character from Clone Wars to act as Boba's opponent in the big climactic Western duel, which... yeah, it's a bit clumsy for lore reasons, I'm not going to dwell on it here, but Boba Fett wins the duel, barely. But right after, the Rancor starts going on an uncontrollable rampage, and at this point, I, the viewer, I think I've got this figured out. See, I'm thinking, this is the point where all of Boba Fett's leadership and community building skills are going to be put to the test. His pet Rancor is tearing up the town, and this is his chance to walk up to it, remind it who's the boss, show it some compassion to calm it down, and reassure the townsfolk that they will rebuild Mos Espa to be a better community than it's ever been, that no mob boss will dare set foot in this town again. A final culmination to Boba Fett's growth as a character, and the last nail in the coffin of his old, selfish, and cold bounty hunter persona. That's how I think they're gonna end it, for sure. So Boba Fett stands up and does nothing because Baby Yoda calms the Rancor down. Yeah, I guess I kind of buried the lead. Din Djarin, more commonly known as Mando, is an intergalactic bounty hunter first introduced in the 2019 Disney Plus show The Mandalorian. You may have heard of it. The Mandalorian is... you know, it's fine. The first season is fine. It came out at a point where the sequel trilogy was wrapping up and everyone was super toxic about it, so it was kind of nice to have a thing that was just agreeably good. I remember that stretch of time when The Mandalorian was first premiering, and it felt kind of like a breath of fresh air. I was mad about Rise of Skywalker, and Cats 2019 was slowly giving me toxoplasmosis. But Mandalorian was neat. It was a nice serial with a cute, marketable hook and a format that was faithful to what George Lucas originally envisioned as the style of Star Wars. Late 2019, that was a different time, huh? Din Djarin is an interesting character. I want to get that out of the way early. Like the last section, I don't want to give the impression that this is just a limp attempt at positivity for the sake of positivity. Mando has a legitimately interesting character arc. At the beginning of the series, Mando is part of a highly religious Mandalorian clan who adheres to strict traditions and beliefs. He can never show his face, lest he be cast out of the tribe. Later on, he has to fight another member of the clan for the right to bear a sacred Mandalorian weapon. Now, if you're a casual Star Wars viewer, and there is nothing wrong with being a casual Star Wars viewer, please don't make the same life mistakes I did, then you probably wouldn't think much of this. You'd probably pick up that Mandalorian culture is highly religious and warrior-like, and, you know, maybe a bit culty in a fundamentalist kind of way, but you probably wouldn't think that's weird. But if you've made the mistake of getting neck-deep into Star Wars lore and watching, reading, playing all the supplementary material, you'd probably realize that it's super weird, because the last time we saw mainstream Mandalorian culture in a piece of Star Wars media, it was almost nothing like this. In fact, if it's close to anything in established Star Wars canon, it's closer to the Death Watch, a Mandalorian terrorist cell that sought to overthrow Mandalore's establishment during the regime of Duchess Satine. I love Star Wars, it's not political. So when Mandalorian Season 2 rolls around, the other shoe drops and Mando meets Bo-Katan, Satine's sister, who used to be in Death Watch herself, and she appropriately tells him that he's part of a cult and that his beliefs about Mandalorian culture are super toxic, and holy shit! Mando is now forced to confront his own belief system and wrestle with the idea that his clan might not be representative of what Mandalorian culture truly is. What's he gonna do with that information? He doesn't completely discard his old beliefs. One person telling him he's a crackpot wouldn't usually be enough to completely throw away his personality, of course, but it's enough to start thawing at least a few of the more detrimental beliefs. Although he emotionally struggles to do so, he does wind up removing his helmet for Grogu's sake at multiple points throughout the show. And eventually, he returns to that clan, and with the Darksaber in hand, no less. The Darksaber is a sacred Mandalorian weapon, at least to fundamentalist groups like the Death Watch or Mando's clan. A weapon with a bloody history that's been passed down from warrior to warrior. The rightful owner is actually Bo-Katan, and Mandalorian Season 2 touches on that, but I don't have the time to get into that can of worms. So another member of the clan challenges Mando to a duel for the Darksaber, and Mando wins, but right after this, he's forced to admit that he removed his helmet in front of others, and this small slight is enough for the clan to cast him out. Mando is rejected from the family that helped raise him over years and years just because he broke a religious commandment once. Twice. You might think that's enough for him to swear off his old code of beliefs. Bo-Katan warned him that he's been living with a cult, and that cult just cast him out for what seems like a pretty flimsy reason. But there's actually a pretty sad exchange near the end of Book of Boba Fett when Mando is helping Boba Fett fend off the Pikes. The fight seems lost, and he and Boba Fett are about to walk out and face their deaths. Boba Fett tells him that he doesn't have to sacrifice himself, that he can just run and save himself with his blessing. But Mando just responds,
This is the way.
And walks out with him to die. This demonstrates to me that Mando is still struggling to throw out his old faith completely, or that he's willing to adopt the more positive aspects of it while casting aside the others. It demonstrates that his faith is not an all-or-nothing monolith to him anymore, but it's still taking up real estate in his brain. There's real, believable character growth and struggles going on here, and it's honestly pretty powerful. Here's the problem. Let's rewind a bit. This scene right here, where Mando is cast out from his clan, this doesn't happen in an episode of The Mandalorian. This is episode 5 of the Book of Boba Fett. Episode 5 of the Book of Boba Fett does not feature Boba Fett at all. It is all Mando and Grogu's story. Episode 6 of the Book of Boba Fett also does not feature Boba Fett at all. It is also all Mando and Grogu's story. Episode 7 of the Book of Boba Fett is the series finale. Boba Fett does feature here, he damn well better, and it almost wraps up his arc, but as I mentioned earlier, Grogu kinda steals the big climactic moment of leadership and triumph from him. Boba Fett's story stops dead in its tracks after episode 4 and doesn't pick up again until literally the final episode where Grogu ends the series climax for him. So, is it just me, or did we just watch one Disney Plus show get eaten alive by another? It seriously felt that way to me, watching Book of Boba Fett as it was premiering. I can't understate how suddenly Boba Fett's story just halts, so that we get what are, functionally, 2 more episodes of The Mandalorian smack dab in the middle of another series. This is something that Mandalorian Season 2 also struggled with, to a smaller extent. There were many episodes in that season that felt more like pilots for other shows than they did an actual part of Mando's story. It never actually stopped telling Mando's story, but it started to feel like I was watching commercials instead of a show. Oh, would you look at that, Ahsoka and Rangers of the New Republic coming soon to Disney Plus. Sure is convenient that those made appearances in Mando Season 2. But Mando Season 2 wasn't this bad. It never flat out stopped telling its story and cut to a different series entirely mid-season like Book of Boba Fett did. I am a big Star Wars nerd. I've watched all of Clone Wars, I've played Jedi Fallen Order, I've watched both seasons of The Mandalorian, and while I haven't watched all of Rebels, I at least have a passing knowledge of what happens in it. I've even dipped my toes into old Legends stuff like the original Thrawn trilogy, TIE Fighter, and Knights of the Old Republic. Legends is a mess. It was a mess even before the Disney reset. Please do not get invested in it. When I started watching The Book of Boba Fett, I went in with the knowledge of who the Mandalorian is and where his story is at. I went in knowing about Mandalorian politics and religion and history, about Boba Fett's life story, about how Boba and Mando have interacted in the past, etc, etc, etc. If a casual fan started watching Book of Boba Fett without any of that knowledge, just on the basis that Boba Fett is cool and they remember him from Empire Strikes Back, they're gonna have a bad time, and that sucks. But even with all that knowledge, it still feels like one show stopped so that another could continue in the middle of it. There comes a point in the Book of Boba Fett where I am not watching the Book of Boba Fett anymore. It abruptly stops being itself. It's being eaten alive in front of my eyes by another popular entry in this giant multimedia franchise. And honestly, Boba Fett deserved better. He's been making a positive impact on Star Wars fans' lives since the story of the Faithful Wookiee, and barring Legends stuff, he's never really had a big live-action story to call his own. All he had in that space was, "He's no good to me dead," and falling unceremoniously into the Sarlacc pit. For as many action figures, comic books, and video games he's sold, Boba Fett deserved a cool story and character arc, and it really sucks that he almost got it, but didn't. In the penultimate scene of the series, Boba Fett walks around Mos Espa, people thanking him for a fight well fought, and he laments that he doesn't quite feel like a leader.
We are not suited for this.
And I feel bad for him. This scene reads to me as a sad admission that Boba Fett could have had a complete story, that he could have risen to the task of becoming the leader that Mos Espa needed. And the thing is, the townsfolk are right. He is a leader. There is a leader in him, whether he wants to admit it or not. We've seen it time and time again throughout the series. But that moment of triumph, the moment where he steps up and realizes his potential, where he definitively asserts his leadership, both to the town and to himself, that doesn't happen. He kills a guy far away from everybody else, and Grogu steals that moment from him. The final scenes of the Book of Boba Fett don't even belong to Boba Fett. The last thing we see in the Book of Boba Fett is Mando and Grogu flying off to their next adventure, wherever and in whoever else's show it may be. This show left me feeling just drained. I feel taken advantage of. I feel like Ralphie after solving the decoded message in A Christmas Story.
A crummy commercial?
Which is not how a story set in a deep mythology should make you feel. The world building in recent Star Wars media feels incredibly inorganic and artificial, in a way that's detrimental to the characters and stories within it. Star Wars can, and used to, feel richer than this. So maybe it would be wise to look to the past. Perhaps even to look away from Star Wars for a moment. Maybe we should remove that pin from the Silmarillion. Actually, hey, wait a minute. What was on that pin? Oh shit, it's Kingdom Hearts! Sora is an intergalactic bounty hunter, Keyblade wielder, first introduced in the 2002 PlayStation 2 game Kingdom Hearts. I will not be unpacking Kingdom Hearts plot today. I used up enough emotional energy already just summing up Boba Fett and The Mandalorian. But I wanted to touch on Kingdom Hearts for a bit because it has always, notoriously, been in the same predicament that Star Wars has found itself in. Kingdom Hearts has a reputation for being complicated. And I'm going to say the same thing that Kingdom Hearts fans and AEW audience members have been saying for years. It is not. I think there's a difference between being complicated and just being a lot to remember, and Kingdom Hearts is far more the latter than it is the former. If you play the Kingdom Hearts series from front to back in release order, which is more or less the order that the HD collections present them in, it is fairly easy to follow. It's a lot to follow, I won't deny that, but it's not hard to follow. Yes, there are differences between the Heartless and the Emblem Heartless and the Nobodies and the Unversed and the Dream Eaters, but the heart of the story, pun intended, is always fairly easy to follow. It's not hard to follow character motivations and arcs along, even though there's stuff like time travel and possession and bodies separating from characters' souls and becoming characters of their own. I actually made a whole video years ago defending Kingdom Hearts 3's story, and I stand by it. Despite needing to play a whole buttload of spin-offs to understand parts of it, I thought that the payoff was worth it, and it's admirable that it managed to wrap up as many stray plot threads as it did. And you can get into the series too. It's not hard. If you have a PS4 or 5, you can literally go to GameStop's website right now and buy nearly the whole series bundled together for $30. That is everything up to and including Kingdom Hearts 3, and if you play it all in the order that it is presented, you will be fine. Here's the catch though. According to my playtime in each game, tracked by the games themselves, my final playtime for the entire series, caught up to this point, is 177 hours and 38 seconds. That is over a week, and I did not play the mobile games. So even though, for $30, you're getting 6 full JRPGs, 3 movies, and a demo, you are still expected to sit down and play 6 full JRPGs, 3 movies, and a demo. Oh, by the way, that package doesn't include the aforementioned mobile games, the DLC bonus episode for KH3, or the rhythm game that is also, somehow, against all odds, canon. That's a lot of time to spend. It's not a lot of money to spend, but it's a lot of time to spend. And I think that in this entertainment economy, time is more valuable to publishers and corporations than straight money. After all, time spent playing Kingdom Hearts is time not spent playing Fortnite, or Call of Duty, or Elden Ring, or insert other big game that's competing with Kingdom Hearts here. In fact, I think Square Enix in general is starting to approach their other franchises like this as well. I touched on this in my top 10 of 2021 video talking about Neo: The World Ends With You, and as good as that game is, it's a little weird that its plot is predicated on something that happens in the bonus episode of the Switch port of the game that it's a sequel to. You would need to spend a fair bit of time replaying the game on Switch to learn about that kind of thing. Not Kingdom Hearts time, but, you know, time all the same. And of course, outside of video games, Marvel's been like this for decades. It doesn't outright punish people who aren't caught up, but it does reward you if you've been watching all the movies with little cameos and callbacks and post-credit stingers. There's a whole cottage industry of news sites posting articles explaining to normies who don't read all the comics what all the post-credit stuff means. It literally pays to invest a lot of time into this stuff. Netflix famously wrote in a shareholder letter that its real competitors aren't other streaming services like HBO, but other broad entertainment like Fortnite. To quote, "We earn consumer screen time, both mobile and television, away from a very broad set of competitors. We compete with, and lose to, Fortnite more than HBO. There are thousands of competitors in this highly fragmented market vying to entertain consumers." Screen time. That's the ballgame. And you know, if you want to be a Marvel fan who watches all the shows and the movies and reads all the comics, that's fine. I don't want to belittle anyone for being a super fan of anything. I've played nearly all of Kingdom Hearts. I can't throw stones. I do not want to put the blame on fans for being fans of things. I also, however, do not want folks to forget that a lot of these things that people are fans of are things owned by giant conglomerates who are not your friends. It is awful convenient that when it came out that Disney donated to homophobic politicians who went on to introduce homophobic policy, even though that policy would have affected me personally as a kid and will affect kids negatively in the present day, I still hesitated to cancel my Disney Plus subscription because, well, I don't want to give up Marvel or Star Wars or these other franchises that I've invested all this time in. It's a sunk cost fallacy. Awfully convenient, that. Disney now owns properties with long, sprawling continuities that people are invested in on a subscription service that will continue to drip feed them money so long as people keep spending vast amounts of their time on Star Wars and on Marvel and on just watching old animated movies in a fit of depression. Beauty and the Beast is my go-to, for the record. And I get it. That's entertainment. No ethical consumption under capitalism, right? But it's shows like the Book of Boba Fett and The Mandalorian that kind of expose it for the machine that it is. Book of Boba Fett isn't just bad because it stops being itself, though that in itself is bad. It's especially bad because it breaks the illusion. When Grogu stops the Rancor at the end and robs Boba Fett of his big triumphant character arc resolution, it makes Star Wars feel less like a livable world and instead like more Star Wars from the Star Wars machine, feeding Disney's executives more money to simultaneously promote queer voices and homophobic policy.
It's all a machine, partner. Live free, don't join.
J.R.R. Tolkien was an intergalactic bounty hunter. No, that's not true. I'm sorry, this bit is over. The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion were all published in a capitalist system. As I alluded to at the very beginning of this video, Tolkien had intended to publish The Silmarillion before Lord of the Rings, but his publisher rejected his drafts of The Silmarillion in favor of another Hobbit story, one that would borrow from both the characters of The Hobbit and the mythology of The Silmarillion. And the thing is, those publishers did guide Tolkien towards the more profitable outcome. The Silmarillion, published posthumously, sold only a small fraction of the copies that The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings sold. Not a lot of people read it, compared to its more popular predecessors. Like, okay, you, watching this video, I'm talking to you right now. Could you tell me the first thing about the Ainur? Do you know who they are? Tell me who they are, right now. Tell me who they are. Tell me one of their names. Okay, I'm sure there's like a few of you who actually can answer that, but I'm willing to bet real money that they're the outlier in this thought experiment. The honest truth is that The Silmarillion is a hard book to market. It's so long and so dense that it has a terminology index at the back. It doesn't have any adaptations. Power metal concept albums notwithstanding. Even that TV series that Amazon just announced is more of a direct prequel to The Lord of the Rings than it is an adaptation of any part of the Silmarillion. But with all that said, the Silmarillion is also so rich. You can tell that Tolkien put his heart and soul into this mythology. It feels that way to read. That's part of the joy of mythologies, of listening to a good story. Even when they're produced in a cynical system, the best mythologies can make that artifice disappear and remind us of the beauty of the human soul on a grand, sometimes cosmic level. The Book of Boba Fett wasn't just a letdown for Boba Fett's potential as a character, it also jarringly made its audience aware of that artifice. And I get the sense that that's the way Lucasfilm wants it. You're already giving us that sweet, sweet Disney Plus money. We know it, you know it, we own Star Wars, so it's not like you'll be going anywhere anytime soon. It sucks. It really, really sucks. It feels intentional and cynical just from watching the damn thing. And cruelly, I feel like I can't trust Star Wars to not do this again. As good as that Kenobi trailer looks, how do I know they're not going to shoehorn in a bunch of references to other shows in a cheap attempt to keep me on their streaming service? Like Tolkien's body of work, Star Wars was created in a capitalist system to thrive in a capitalist system, and there it remains. Even under new ownership, the end goal is still the same: to make a profit. And ultimately, that's Disney's goal as well. It's important to recognize that Disney's actions and motives do not exist in a bubble. Disney is not a creator. They're a label applied to dozens of different projects from dozens of different voices. And while it behooves them to make that label as diverse as possible, to appeal to as many different viewers as possible, it also behooves them to make money. Like, it's easy to point at Disney simultaneously wanting to promote voices in the LGBTQIA+ community and also donating money to hateful politicians and cry hypocrisy. And, well, that's because it is hypocrisy. But it pays for them to play both sides of the game. Appealing to gay and transgender fans will earn them their money, and those hateful politicians will also probably earn them a tax break down the road. This is something that nearly everyone's had to confront lately, that the media they love is only one facet of a more cynical machine. Disney, Comcast, AT&T, Viacom, Activision, Ubisoft, SNK, hell, even Nintendo reportedly got caught busting a union. They've all got dirt. And there's a feeling that even if you boycott them all, no matter where you run, your next favorite brand has probably got some dirt that you don't know about just waiting to get revealed. So, what do you even do? Well, you can just shrug and say no ethical consumption under capitalism and continue consuming their stuff, embracing the everything bagel, because what else are you gonna do? Not watch or read or play anything? Get a real hobby? Okay, I'm going somewhere with this whole entertainment consumer thing, but quick side note, please get a hobby outside of media consumption. I'm serious. I know some of you really need to hear this. Like, I bake, and I go hiking every now and then. You don't have to be good at it. Just have something else in your life that gives you fulfillment, that you don't have to sell, and that does not belong to a giant media corporation. Like, please, for your own sake. Like, y'all, have you tried this sourdough shit? This is amazing. My kitchen smells awesome. You should try this, guys. No wonder it took off during the pandemic. You can also admit that everyone has their line, and that some cases of problematic creators are more clear-cut than others. I used to be a huge fan of Harry Potter when I was a kid, and now that I'm out as non-binary, I can't look at the continued aggressive transphobia of She Who Must Not Be Named and continue to buy her stuff. So, I don't anymore. Harry Potter is dead. Yeah. However, there's something about Disney's actions that feels less personal and more cold. Disney did not get defensive about the Don't Say Gay bill when the politicians they donated to unveiled it. They're actually aggressively pushing the message that they didn't want this to happen and that they're pleading with leadership to reverse it. Disney shareholders want to have their cake and eat it too. They like the LGBTQIA+ community because it gives them a shitload of money, but they also like hateful politicians because they give them a shitload of tax breaks. And they're all like this. 99% of the companies who own the stuff you like do this. You can flee from Marvel to DC, but until recently that was owned by AT&T, who were doing the same thing. Maybe you want to watch Star Trek instead. Nope. Star Trek NFTs, baby! This is not a Disney problem, or even an entertainment problem. It's a worldwide systemic corporate problem. It's a problem with a system that madly pushes for short-term profits, that treats people as a resource, that thinks the line can only keep going up forever. It's a system so big that even when boycotts are feasible, which in many other economic sectors like tech, energy, and retail, they absolutely aren't, when they are feasible, they still aren't remotely effective. I haven't touched Harry Potter in years, and neither have a lot of people, but do you think that's stopping Warner Brothers Discovery from pushing ads for Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore in the faces of everyone who goes to see any movie in any movie theater? I really don't want to dwell on the socioeconomic consequences of such a systemic issue. Even in the best case corporate scenarios, corporate lines can only go up so far before collapse occurs. And while regulation is badly needed, the system incentivizes those regulators to either not act or speed things along towards that collapse. And those are really scary things to think about. Things at a scale that no individual human should have to worry about. And I usually don't worry about it. Or at least I try not to. There's only so much that one can healthily worry about before they go full Chris McCandless and get themselves killed trying to live in the woods Into the Wild style. But the thing is, by being so upfront about its goals, about the time it wants you to invest in itself, the Book of Boba Fett kind of forces that worry onto me. How can I even relax and watch some fun space opera antics if the only thing that it can say is, watch more of me or else? It wants me to be aware of the fact that Star Wars, and by extension the rest of Disney, is an inevitability. It's like Disney put up a sign in front of Star Wars saying, "Don't forget, we're here forever." It kind of broke Star Wars for me. I don't want to do this anymore. If this is how Lucasfilm's gonna do Star Wars from now on, I'm out. Like, okay, I'm sure the day is gonna come when I come crawling back to something Star Wars related. I am a feeble worm who has a Star Wars shaped hole in their heart. But right now, I can't keep doing this shit. Star Wars has lived rent-free in my head since I was a small child. The rent is now due, and it hasn't paid. And to be honest, since Book of Boba Fett ended, I've been living it up pretty great. I haven't even watched Moon Knight yet. I started reading the Discworld books, Elden Ring is phenomenal, I'm replaying Xenoblade 1, and that game's incredible.
That's Dunban over there!
Hell, y'all watch Our Flag Means Death yet? Good shit. Like, I'm not saying that my life immediately improved once I stopped caring about Star Wars and the MCU. Okay, that is kind of what I'm saying, isn't it? Look, if you're still invested and excited about Star Wars or Marvel, I am legitimately happy for you. I envy you. You're getting a new Sam Raimi movie and a new Taika Waititi movie coming out this year. You've got it good. I'm low-key planning on going to see Love and Thunder just like everyone else. I can't act all high and mighty or lord over your tastes. It would be hypocritical of me to say that I can't watch Star Wars or Marvel or Disney stuff anymore out of moral tastes. I admit that. Elden Ring was reportedly produced under really crappy working conditions. Xenoblade was published by Nintendo, who has a history of being openly hostile to YouTubers like myself. Every corporation is evil, it's all a machine, partner, yada yada, whatever, I get it. But the least Lucasfilm can do is not nakedly exaggerate it, you know? Former Disney CEO Michael Eisner once famously said, "We have no obligation to make art. We have no obligation to make history. We have no obligation to make a statement. But to make money, it is often important to make history, to make art, or to make some significant statement. We must always make entertaining movies, and if we make entertaining movies, at times, we will reliably make history, art, a statement, or all three." I know Eisner probably meant that as a message about the virtues of doing business, but it also just kinda sums up my feelings about Star Wars right now. Star Wars is, and always has been, a business machine. And that machine often makes incredible art. The whole original trilogy, Revenge of the Sith, Jedi Fallen Order, The Last Jedi, the last 4 episodes of Clone Wars, that's just a short list of Star Wars media that has affected me in profound ways. I can't lie and say that this is a soulless franchise because it's not. A lot of heart has gone into making this long, ongoing story mean something to people. But it's built to make a profit, first and foremost. And if it affects me in profound ways, that's just a side effect, not the intended outcome. The Book of Boba Fett harshly reminded me of that. It's important to recognize, however, every once in a while, this big fat profit machine with all these brands stapled to it. Because if that machine keeps blindly focusing on profits, it'll break down, inevitably. There are good parts in it worth keeping around once it does. That's why we're all in it to begin with. Sometimes it takes a show like the Book of Boba Fett to make us recognize the machine for what it is, to encourage us to step out and expand our horizons. So, thanks for the break, Book of Boba Fett. That's not sarcasm or a limp attempt at positivity for the sake of positivity. Sometimes it takes a machine breaking for me to step out of it and find genuine fulfillment elsewhere. Hopefully, if or when I come back to Star Wars, it'll be in a better spot.